And what we're going to do is we're going to create a project from scratch in Firebase, and then I'm going to set it up with GitLab so that whenever we push anything to the repository, the changes automatically get deployed in Firebase. So I don't think a lot of people are actually using Firebase, and I don't really think a lot of people would be looking for a way to deploy this. Um, Set up this CI/CD for Firebase. So what I'll try is, I just try to make this whole video a kind of an introduction to Firebase as well, so that even if you don't need the CI/CD pipeline setup, you could still learn a lot from this video and this live stream about Firebase, like the basics of Firebase and things like that. But having said that, it's still going to be more focused towards GitLab and Firebase, so that the task at hand is also gets handled. All right. So what I'll start from is I'll just create a project from scratch. Let's just call it test project. And I'm going to make the dev instance first. So let's create this. So basically what happens is, we generally, whenever we are working with Firebase, we try to create projects with like two instances of each project. So a dev instance and a production instance. And in the dev instance, we allow everybody to just keep pushing and doing, their development, and the production instance goes to the client. And let me first create a database really quick. So Firebase is basically a suite of all of these services that we generally have in a web app. So for example, you'll need database, you'll need some kind of storage to place the files that users upload. You're going to host your static files somewhere, and then you'll have your business logic. So all of these things are actually handled here. So for example, we have a database. I'm going to start with the Cloud Firestore, which is actually the newer approach, newer database. Well, this is also actually a couple of years old, but that's fine. So we're going to go with Cloud Firestore for the database. And as you can see here, we have a real-time database also. This was their first attempt to NoSQL databases, but it's a little bit deprecated right now. They're keeping it for backwards compatibility, but they're really promoting the Cloud Firestore. And okay, the database is created. So what happens is, in these in Cloud Firestore, we can create collections. Like if you guys know any NoSQL database, what happens is that we create collections and documents. So in Firestore, we can actually define some rules. And the reason I'm telling this here is because we're probably going to, within the next 30 to 35 minutes, we're going to automatically deploy these rules also. So these are the default rules. And when I make the changes to my files and push them to um, GitLab, you'll see that these things get updated automatically. Okay, and I'm going to initialize the storage bucket as well. This is already here. Hosting. This is going to be important because in the next 30 to 45 minutes, we're probably going to be able to see something in this section here, and then the functions. Okay, so this is our dev instance. Let's create another project. Test project prod. So the reason I'm creating two instances is because I'm going to try and demonstrate how you can push your changes to your development branch, and it is going to be deployed to the dev instance of the project. And if you push a tag, or you tag your commits with something, what's going to happen is it is going to push it to the production instance. So that way, like you will know that, like you can set up the rules in GitLab so that not everybody is allowed to push a tag, right? Maybe you let your team leads, you give them the right to create tags and push them. So that way you will know that this is the production instance is actually in good hands. Okay, so again, the same for Firestore. And one more thing here, which is not really related to the to Firebase or GitLab, is that I'm going to be using Angular as an example here. So the whole process itself is actually agnostic. It doesn't really care. Like GitLab and Firebase both really don't care which technology you're using for your front end. But the reason I'm going to use Angular is because it mostly comes pre-bundled with unit tests and end-to-end tests. So you're going to see how those tests work here and how they will work in GitLab also. So we'll be able to see um, those tests as well. Okay. Okay, so there we have it. Test project dev and test project prod. So these are two of the projects. Let's head over to GitLab. I'm going to sign in. So I'm already signed in. I'm going to create a new project here. Blank project. Let's call it test project again. And it's fine. Private. Okay. So the test project is created. Now what I'll do is I'll just clone this project into my computer, and then I'm going to initialize Firebase Angular project here so that we can see the integration and work. Okay, so now I'm going to clone this. So git clone GitLab Firebase CI user. I just created a temporary user for the demo, and test project.git. I hope this one works. Yep. Okay. So this README was created um, with by default using the GitLab new project tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this because Angular CLI is going to create its own README. So we're going to go take a step back, and I'm just going to say ng new test project. That's fine. CSS doesn't really matter. So this is going to install these packages and create a new Angular project for us. And as you can see, this already has these E2E and probably somewhere here karma directories. So we won't need to set up those things separately. So what the idea behind this is that every time you push something to the repository, like besides the deployment, it is also going to be able to run end-to-end tests and unit tests, and you can also configure it to deploy it, of course, only when these tests have passed. You can do pretty much everything you want because like this GitLab CI is actually very flexible. And okay, the project initialized, so cd test project. And let's first just commit this so that we know that we are able to push and pull from the repository. So let me just add it, commit this. I'm gonna push this. Okay. So now I'm gonna refresh this. We'll see if our files appear here. There you go. So the files are coming. So that means the whole connection between these my system and my repo is done. So now all I need to do is start working in the repo, and then you guys can see how we can integrate these two things together. So let me just first run this quickly so that we know that we have a build. So this is going to compile this. Okay. So there we see the boilerplate page, and that means we are looking good. Right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the end-to-end tests and the unit tests really quick so that we know that they are in a working condition. And then when these run on the server, then I'm going to show you the logs that they're creating. So NGE2E is probably going to run end-to-end tests. So we're not going to go um, like really crazy with these tests because we just want something to work with. Okay, so as you can notice, this Chrome actually opened in the background, right? Let me just run it again. Right. So you see, to run the tests, this actually opened Google Chrome. And the problem is the server, the GitLab server, when it runs the end-to-end tests, it won't have a graphical interface for displaying this Chrome window, right? So what we need to do is we need to configure these tests in the way that they run headlessly. Now, it doesn't matter really whether you're using this protector or Cypress. There are many test suites, right? So whichever technology you're using, you can easily configure all of these technologies to run the tests headlessly. So what we're going to do is we're going to just do it um, for the protector that came actually with it. So let's just modify this. And in case of protector, we need to add a property here in capabilities, and I think it is called Chrome options. So this is going to be the object, and then we can also specify here args, and this is an array. So it's going to be headless like that, right? So if we run end-to-end tests again, this time hopefully it won't open Chrome. There you go. So you notice this time it did not open the browser itself. So it ran the tests headlessly. So, now we've got the end-to-end tests handled. Let's see if I can run unit tests also. Yeah, so unit tests are actually still running with the browser, and this is actually watching for changes, right? Which means that even if I close it, it's just going to keep opening it. So this is a problem because we cannot have an indefinite process in the CI, because even in GitLab, their free tier, even the paid tier, of course, has bills by the minutes that we use there. So what we want to do right now is, number one, we want to run the unit tests without opening the browser, because of course we don't have GUI on the server. And other than that, we also don't want it to constantly look for changes. So I think It can be done with ng test and browsers from headless and watch false. So I hope that this works. Ah, there you go. So now what we have is we are able to run the end-to-end tests. We are able to build the project. We are able to run the unit tests, and we're able to do all of these things without opening the browser, right, or using the GUI. So I think this is a nice time to commit it. So I'll just commit it and I'll say E2E and unit tests should now run um, endlessly. Right. So now what we're going to do is we are going to create the first basic script for GitLab. So let's have a look first, really quick. If we have the latest commit here. Yes, 30 seconds ago, so things are looking fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a new file here. This might actually be a little bit small, but I hope it's visible. I can actually increase my screen scaling, maybe. So I don't know. Anyway, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a GitLab CI config file, and that is going to tell GitLab what to do when something is pushed to the repository. So it's really easy. What we're going to do is we're going to create a file in the root directory of the project, and let me first take a look at the, yeah, this is a little bit messed up. It should be dist. Okay, so now we're good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to configure the GitLab pipeline, right? This is what this whole video is about. So of course we needed something to work with. That is why I created everything from scratch. And the name of the file is going to be um, .gitlab ci.yaml. And the first thing that we're going to have in this file is going to be name of the image. So basically GitLab CI is going to pull this image from the Docker hub, right? So this is going to be name of a Docker image. So if you don't know what that is, you might want to look up and study a little bit about it. But Docker images are a little bit like a virtual machine. Like that is the closest thing that they are that I can tell about them. But of course, these are very different. But you have to keep in mind that you will, whenever you create a process, it will need a place to run. It will need an environment to run, right? So the environment would depend on the main image that you provide to it. So what GitLab is going to do is it is going to pull that image on its own, and then it is going to um, run your commands into that image, right? So you will know the exact environment that you're working with. And for my case, I already have an image that I maintain on Docker Hub, so you guys are welcome to use that too. So it's called IBN Yusrat slash Angular Firebase, right? This image is going to have all of the requirements of Angular and all of the requirements of Firebase also. So for example, it will have the Firebase command line tools installed. It will have Node installed. It will have the required items for running these end-to-end tests, because these things require Chrome, of course. So you can just get started with this image, and it is going to be um, it is going to save you guys a lot of time, right? So this is the first thing that we define in this file, and the next thing is that, since like I mentioned earlier, that we will always have limited quota and limited minutes in the um, in GitLab's CI pipelines, right? We cannot have a process running for hours and hours, because this is how they charge us, the computing power that they are giving us. So one way to save that computing power is to cache the node modules, because every time we build these items, actually we don't, if we remove node modules, the build is going to start from scratch again. That is going to take a lot of time. Even installing node modules could take some time, right? So what I would do is I would first define how this is going to um, share some of these paths, right? So I'm going to tell it that these are the directories that it should not delete and store somewhere for next cycle of the CI pipeline, right? So for example, in our case, it's going to be node modules, right? And another thing that we are going to do here is we are going to probably mention some functions here as well, but that comes up later in the story. Um, this seems to be fine. Now we just need to define the name of the um, the process that is, because we're going to like in the beginning I told you guys that we have functions, we have hosting, and we have rules in Firebase, right, for the database and things like that. So what we're going to do here is that we are going to define three different steps. So for example, I'll say deploy hosting to dev, right? So this is basically one of the pipelines that are going to run whenever we push. But of course, I'm going to explain how, what is going to actually trigger this pipeline, right? So first is going to be, we're going to define the state. So this is going to be deploy. And then I'm just going to define a script here. And what script means, that these are basically just the commands that we use whenever we are using Firebase, right? So actually, one thing that we have missed here already, I'll just write this file. First, we need to actually initialize Firebase in this project. So I'll just come back to this GitLab CI again, but I'll just initialize quickly this Firebase into our Angular project. So it's simple command. I'm just going to say Firebase init, and I have to log in first. So Firebase login. No, thank you. And I'm going to log in with this test user. Right. So now I'm logged in and Firebase init. So now these are the services that I'm going to use from their suite. So let's go with I'm going to use Firestore, functions, hosting, storage, and that's it. So I'm going to use an existing project, and let's initialize it with dev. That's fine. So it is creating files for Firestore rules, for storage rules. The rules are, of course, basically the permissions that we're going to give it. So um, we can define which document or which collection is accessible by authenticated users, which collection is accessible by public. We can even specify roles, so who gets to read which document and who gets restricted. So all of these things are actually defined in these files. So I'm going to install the dependencies now. And after these things are done, then I'm going to go back to the GitLab CI, because that is what is going to that is the real the file which is going to do most of the hard work for us. I'm going to call this dist instead of public. Yes, no, this is fine. Okay, let me just commit this. Okay, so what I did is I initialized Firebase in our Angular project, and I've pushed those changes to the repo, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get back to that file, and we'll see how that one works, right? So let's open this, and we are in the script section. So actually I just enabled functions also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cache their node modules as well, because that has its own directory and it has its own dependencies and everything, right? So in the script, what I'm going to do is this part is basically something that anybody who uses Firebase would be using like almost every day, right? So Firebase use, Firebase deploy, or all of those things. So this is not really the most fancy part, but the idea here is that the script part is where you are going to supply your own commands, and here you're going to tell what to do with which section and things like that. So for example, here what I'll do is I'll tell it to use default profile, which is the dev in our case, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the install. So once the dependencies are installed, because of course we could have newer dependencies also, even though we are caching them, but still we have to run npm install, because of course the server doesn't get the node modules from the local development environment. And then I'm going to run ng build, hopefully an aot build. And if this is also successful, then I'm going to be running firebase deploy, and I'm not going to deploy everything but only hosting, right? This should be the most basic setup. Now if I push it at this point, what's going to happen is that this will work, right? And the way it will work is every time something is pushed, it is going to run this pipeline. But that might be an overkill. So maybe you could have just changed something in the functions, right? Or maybe in some other directory, and the hosting still gets updated. So that won't be a best use of the resources of GitLab. So what we'll do is we'll just specify that I want this particular deploy hosting to dev. I want this particular pipeline to only run when somebody pushes a branch. So refs actually means that this is we're talking about the branch here, and we can actually specify like which branch. So we can restrict it to master only. And the reason I will restrict it to master only is because, of course, in real life, you might have people who are, pushing their feature branches. So you don't want the pipeline to run all the time. Um, and for hosting, I would like it to run maybe if there are changes only in the source directory. So if the rest of the project has changed, then probably nothing has actually changed in the actual build of the project, right? Unless somebody modified a component or a module or something. So we can restrict this pipeline to run only if something in the source folder has changed. See, so we'll just go with this one first, and we'll see how this works. So I'm just going to add it. I'm going to commit this. And I'm going to push this. Now we're going to see if we were able to get this pipeline to work. Let's look at GitLab. Test project. Okay, so first version of CI, we do see this push, but we don't see the pipeline running, right? And most probably that is because we have not specified, like we actually specified that this pipeline should work only if something in the source has changed. And in the last commit, of course, nothing changed in the source folder, right? Because we changed this CI file only. So let's simulate a change and see what happens. So I'm just going to open something, well, maybe in the HTML. So yeah, this is the welcome. Okay. So now if I status, yeah, now you can see now we are modifying a file inside the source folder. So hopefully, if everything is going fine, this should run the pipeline. So I'm just going to say add and commit. Made some change in the source folder, and I'm going to push this. So let's take a look. Okay, so we have this nice thing called GitLab CI.yaml. Now, whenever we mess something up in the CI file, the problem is that we cannot keep pushing to the repository to see whether our file is a valid file or not, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my file in the linter and we'll see if the file is a valid file, right? So I'm just going to go and get GitLab CI.yaml, and I'm going to take this. And let's see if we can validate this. Okay, this seems to be fine. Deploy hosting to dev. Firebase use default. Oh, yes. Okay, so this is supposed to run on master branch only, and we are pushing to the main branch. So of course, I mean, these guys have just changed everything to main. So let's just rename this target to run on main branch. So I'm going to specify main here now. And I'm going to have to make some changes again to the source folder. But let me just push this. Okay, and let me make some changes in the source folder. So right, well, this time it should work. Let's look at the repository again. Yep. So you can see this. Now it says the pipeline is running. And why is it running? Because this time our filter for running the pipeline actually matched the name of the branch and also the files. So let's look at how this is running and whether it is going to be successful or not, because there is going to be something really relevant here. And let's hope that this doesn't take a lot of time. So what is actually going to happen here is that, if you remember, we actually ran Firebase login at this point, right? So the problem is, yeah, there we see. So the problem is we cannot run that login script here because this is a CI, right? So in CI, how are we going to open browser? Because it is always going to be trashed once the process is completed. So for that purpose, what we need to do is we need to specify. First of all, I'm going to use Firebase use. I'm going to see which projects do we have. So we only have default. Let me add another one, Firebase. Let's add another one. And I'm going to add the production one also, right? Let's call this prod. And now I'm going to create a token for logging in to this project, right? So what happens is that Firebase cannot log in here because we didn't actually specify anything for this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Firebase login and I'm going to do CI. So now it is going to give me a token for logging into the CLI environments. So I can reuse them. So there you can see this is the token. Use this token to log in on a CI server, right? So I hope we can get this into a working condition. We'll just go to settings and repository, CI/CD, variables, and I'm going to add a variable, right? And this time, and this is, we have to call this exactly Firebase token. If I'm not wrong, I hope so. And I'm going to paste this. This token is actually as good as your password, so you have to be very, very careful with this. And we can also mask it if we want. So let's keep it simple for now. So there we have added a Firebase token. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to pipelines again. And I'm going to rerun this. Okay, now it's running again. Let's hope it works this time. Because one other thing that I wanted to demo within this time frame was deploying rules and functions, and but I'll just go over those things in the file because I don't think we can squeeze all of that within these 45 minutes. But let's just hope this one works. Okay, there you go. So Firebase used default this time. You can see this actually worked, right? And it has picked up the project. Why? Because now we've provided it with the token that it needs. So if this succeeds quickly, then we should be in a good position, and hopefully we'll have a deployed version of this. This actually takes a little bit of time. Generally takes about 10 minutes depending on the project, but our project is actually a really uh, basic one, so it shouldn't take too long to compile. Let's hope it finishes quickly. Okay, so you can see this has already it has already deployed it. Now it is just going to zip these node modules, and it's going to upload them so that the next time it comes here it doesn't have to do that. So deploy complete, hosting URL is this, and job has successfully completed. Let's see if we are there. You go, test app is running, some changes, welcome to our experiment. So you can see we didn't actually deploy it by hand, we just pushed the changes to GitLab, and GitLab actually deployed the changes for us. So now what's going to happen is if you have PRs coming from developers and you want their changes to be deployed to Firebase hosting automatically, as soon as you'll merge them into the master branch, it is all automatically going to build it, it is automatically going to deploy it. So in the next maybe a few minutes, I'll see if I can create a tag and push it also. So let's see. This was for dev. Let's say deploy hosting to production, and we can say stage deploy, and the script would be Firebase use prod this time. Okay, because now we want to deploy it to the other URL, which is going to be the production instance. So we are going to say npm install um, ng build aot. But before we, you know, deploy something to production, we want to make sure that the project is actually passing all of these tests. So I'll just say NGE2E, and if you remember, we already configured it to run headlessly. And I'm also going to say ng test browsers Chrome headless and watch false. So this should actually just finish the project, the process. And if all of these, if any of these fails, of course, the pipeline will fail, right? But um, if they're all succeeding, so now at this point, we are in a good position to um, deploy this to our production. So we're going to say Firebase deploy only hosting. And since we already selected the production instance, so this same command is going to deploy to the hosting. And let's just specify instead of refs, I'm just going to say tags. Oh, I think it's going to be, yeah, tags is fine. I think so. Okay, so whenever a tag is pushed, it is going to deploy the changes to the production instance, right? So first off, we have to push the changes to the repo and updated the CI rules. Okay, there you go. So I'm going to tag it. I don't have any tags yet, so git tag v1.0. And one important thing here is that since I made the token protected, the the token is only accessible in the protected branches. This is one of the issues that people actually come across a lot of times. They see they're not able to deploy it because the CI cannot read the token, because the thing that they're missing out is that their branches are not protected and the tokens are actually protected. So that actually causes a little bit of an issue. Let's see if we have any protected tags. We don't have them. Let's add them. So let's say v star. Okay, so now the tag is protected, and we'll just go back here. We have v1.0. Okay, so working directory is also clean. So this should work. Git push origin v1.0. Okay, so the tag is here. Let's see if the pipeline is running. Okay, so for tag, of course, it is not going to run automatically. So we're going to have to run it because, of course, the changes are, from we cannot keep on pushing the changes to the tag all the time. So you have to run this here. You have to see this here in the tags in the pipeline um, section. So you won't be able to see that the tag is running here in the main, because this is your actually branch. This is not a tag, right? So if you go to the pipelines here, you'll see that this is actually running, and you can actually always run it manually as well. But let's take a look at how it is doing. I hope that, yeah, you see, deploy hosting to production. This time it is running. The last time it was deploy hosting to dev was running, right? So there you go. Now using production, the alias prod, and now when we deploy it, it is going to go to the production instance. So now it's building it. Well, I should have specified prod here, but anyway, you guys get the idea. So you see, now end-to-end tests are running first. If you remember, the last time end-to-end tests were not running because that was just dev. So um, we just wanted to get the job done. And now you can see that this test has actually failed because we changed the welcome message, right? I mean, I can actually see it here. Okay, so this one worked, but this one is not working. Let's take a look at what is going on here. Session not created. This version of Chrome driver only supports Chrome version 99. Okay, so my local repository version is actually different than the Chrome driver version that I have in this project. So what you have to do is you have to change in the package JSON. You have to change uh, the what is it called, Selenium Chrome driver version. So if you set it to the one that is available in the image, this should work. um, okay, so this is it from my side. There are tons and tons of other things that can be done in this, but of course within 1 hour there is not a whole lot that can be covered. So if you guys have any question, please feel free to ask. And over to you, Nabil sir.